What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hartness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Daniel Liebeskind, and we speak about Topia that he co-founded, a online platform for communities, an online world, and how to facilitate there and how the world can facilitate its guest. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, scroll down to the show notes and download my free one-page summary. And now lean back to be inspired. Daniel, thrilled to have you on the show.
Yeah, it's phenomenal to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for accepting. And I cannot wait to talk about community building, and building a tool that builds community. Topia, as you're the co-founder. And before we get to the juicy bits, I always start with the same question as a kind of check-in. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
It's an interesting question. I would say that I'm an empowerer of facilitators in many ways. But, really anybody that's building any sort of community is facilitating. And so, I have hired people. I am building sort of a Topia community, a broader community. And there's a lot of facilitation that goes on in bringing people together and helping them to be their best selves, really, and to even understand, helping guide them through what their best self may be, and then helping find the path to get there.
That's a beautiful definition of facilitation.
Thanks. I just made it up.
Yeah, wonderful. When did you start doing that? What was the trigger or the experience that got you into this direction?
That's a good question. When I was a kid, I built video games, and I was actually kind of more of a loner, but I had a huge family. I have 60 something people on one side. I have 40 on another side. So a large family, and then went to summer camp where one side of my family just took over the camp every year. And so there was a lot of community building, facilitation within that. I was also the second oldest of all the cousins. There were something like 20 cousins. And so, I think it started there. I also, along the way, did a lot of international travel. I was a digital nomad for many years as I was building different apps and had a dev shop. And while I was on those journeys, I was part of different communities of creators, singers, yoga instructors, really brilliant facilitators who needed help figuring out what is the platform to get an international audience to get people to come to my retreats. For example, how do I market myself? And so I was helping them do that while they were helping me understand more about the brilliance of the facilitation that they were doing. And really, that actually is the origin of Topia in many ways, is how to empower creators that are incredible facilitators, incredible performers, incredible bringer together of people and energy transmuters. And how do you, give them the tools and the power to actually create their own experiences and bring people together all over the world?
And I already have a lot of questions about that. Before going there, I would like to come back to something you just mentioned, that in summer camp, big part of your family took over the summer camp. And I think that's a very interesting part when it comes to community, where you have a core that is maybe the in-group, and then you have newcomers joining. And I think the superpower of a community builder or community facilitator is to actually build a bridge between these two and to almost dissolve these silos.
I love that.
Have you learned something from your summer camp experience that has shaped that, or maybe any other brilliant thought about this?
I think that making it really easy for people to cross those lines is pretty critical. And another just example from my life is I moved cities pretty much every 2 years and made lots of new friend groups. Each city I went to, I made new friends. And so one of the interesting things that's happened as I've gotten older is a lot of the friends that I had from San Francisco or from New York or from LA, they moved around. They were looking for introductions. We had parties in different places. And a lot of those people that lived in different places and were different friend groups are now one unified friend group. they came to my wedding, for example, and they all met each other and now they're friends with each other. And this is one of the things that definitely happened at camp as well. And, it happens throughout life. And if you are intentional about networking your network, you wind up with something that's way stronger. I think your friend groups, all the people the stronger they are, the stronger your network is. And I think this is true for community, by the way, as well. Your community is really only as strong as the bonds between individuals. And there are a lot of different structures to community. You can have, a sort of autocratic community where, it's very top heavy and hierarchical. You can have one that's way more democratized and more like a DAO or, some of the kind of governance that we're even seeing from blockchain technologies, that are being enabled by blockchain technologies, where everybody is kind of equal and they're all connecting with each other. But at the end of the day, you don't have a community unless you have strong bonds between individuals. And so a lot of what facilitation with the community is, or at least should be, is strengthening those bonds.
Beautiful. And I think what the counterpart to these bonds is the platform. So there must be a way for the community members to build, maintain, and strengthen these bonds. And this is by ways of communication or interaction, which leads us directly to the topic, right? The platform that you build. And circling back to what you shared before is about what it means to build community and to bring people together. To what extent, or what were the challenges for you to do this online?
So doing this online, the reason for it, so first, the purpose really is to bring accessibility, right? So when you think about a community, one of the challenges with building community is the constraints around and the challenges of actually physically bringing people together. And so what you saw 50 years ago is that your community was very localized, was very geographically constrained to the people that were within traveling distance of you. And over time now we have more international communities. But if you look at something like Burning Man as an example, Burning Man is a huge community in theory that should be very diverse and should be people from all over the world. But what actually ends up happening is it's very expensive. It's very challenging to get to Burning Man, and it costs thousands of dollars and you have to fly there. And so it winds up being actually kind of an elitist community of San Francisco tech people and then some people from over the world. But, because of the challenge of actually accessing this group, it's kind of constrained. And so one of the goals for us was to say, well, can we make it so that Burning Man, as an example, can have a community of people all over the world, all different socioeconomic backgrounds, really remove the constraints, the physical distance constraints of being part of this community, and make it so that any community can truly be international, truly be global, and be incredibly diverse with people from all over the world and all different backgrounds, experiences. And so, I think when we're looking into the future of community, another really important aspect is that just having a group of people talking to each other asynchronously online, so like a Facebook group or an email news thread, an email thread, that's not real human connection. And so the bonds, again, the strengthening the bonds between individuals, it's really hard to do that. Even a Zoom call, you're not really having people intersect with each other. It's more of a broadcast. It's more somebody that's facilitating, speaking to everybody, maybe calling on people, but they're not having that kind of serendipity that's quite important, I think, within real communities. And really good facilitators, what it comes down to is that a lot of these digital platforms, you need really good facilitators to make it work. And if you have those, amazing, right? But it's really challenging to self-facilitate on a 100-person Zoom call, for example. And so the power, the importance of a facilitator is huge in this digital medium. And what we're trying to do is give that power to facilitators, but also kind of democratize it, make it so that, as an example, if you're in a digital space and the facilitator leaves for 10 minutes, people are able to continue on with the mission, which has actually happened in Topia in a couple of instances. So I'll pause there, but yeah, it's my thoughts.
Yeah, I had this kind of moment like, what? We can create serendipity and these encounters in a Zoom call by creating breakout rooms and stuff. Absolutely. But you're right. You need to know how to use the tool. And I think what it boils down is structure, to give structure to a place where You have constraints, but you also have an abundance of possibilities. And I'm intrigued by what you said about Facebook only asynchronous interaction doesn't make community. And I was about to say yes, yes, yes. And I was like, is this actually true? I think we can build very strong connections also in a thread through asynchronous interactions. And I'm right, it's not scalable, I think, because you can there's only one thread at the time, and there are only that many people you can communicate with. So it doesn't create this bond and this connection. Yeah, maybe community. But it's an interesting thought.
I think that, there have been asynchronous communities where bonds between people are incredibly strong. And we've heard about, I know about this anecdotally. I've experienced it firsthand, even where, you're part of a large forum and you say something, somebody responds, you then maybe even start a side thread with that person, or you have a bunch of interactions with them, and you do kind of get each other, and you build a bond, you build a friendship, a relationship with that person. That can happen with multiple people. I think that's one layer of connection, right? So the async connection you might have with somebody can be really strong, but it's just one face of a cube. And synchronous, looking each other in the eyes, that's how we evolved to have real connection with each other. And so these async connections it's not that they're not real. They're just one layer, and there are many other layers that you can have. So what we actually find a lot within Topia, within sort of synchronous metaverse platforms that are emerging, is that many communities are actually using async forums, and they're using these synchronous experiences. And that's great. That's actually what I would say is the optimal way to organize a community. Just synchronous also can be a little bit confusing and miss the layer of async chat, right?
Yes. And I think if you can then combine it with what you meant with this serendipitous encounters, that you meet someone in a space without having scheduled the meeting. I think this kind of space in between is where the magic happens. And so it's never done before. So the community that I'm building, we also started with a Slack channel and a few workshops, and then realized a Slack channel is not enough to build these connections. And being in the two extremes, either fully together in a workshop, too much structure, or very loose in a Slack channel, too little structure. So we built the community platform, and then realized that still it isn't enough. So we went on Velo, not on Topia, but I think the purpose is similar. And what I would be curious about is to explore a bit the edges of structure, because I think building a world, so you can get lost in worlds, right? And you can embark in a world and be very lonely, and you can be Robinson Crusoe. And if nobody is exploring this world with you, you might have to draw a face on a balloon, right? So what is your experience with using the space to facilitate itself, but also being in the space to facilitate actually the community that you want to create, host, nurture?
Yeah, you're bringing up a really important point here, which is that synchronous spaces can actually be very challenging to feel that there's critical mass of community. It can be very lonely. In an async space, you write something, you don't expect somebody to reply immediately anyways, right? So it gives people more flexibility. It's easier to collaborate in some ways asynchronously than trying to bring people together synchronously. And, people know this anecdotally anyway, that's a video game player, especially in older platforms where you're trying to play multiplayer and it's synchronous, and it took a really long time to even find a good match. And you're just sort of sitting in the lobby. And, that exemplifies how challenging it can be to bring people together at the same time in an experience. And so I think the role of the facilitator then, one of the roles, there are a few of them. One is to create the space. And, you can create the space in a way that helps people sort of self-facilitate within groups when they come in there and doesn't actually require your presence. But then the second, even more important, is to actually create events within persistent spaces. Just having a persistent space, even if you have a gigantic community, and people are coming in, often people don't really know what to do, right? The role of the facilitator is still so critical, so important. And in Topia, we actually call these people confluencers. In the real world, a confluence is where a few different rivers come together and become one river. And so in a social context, we use the word confluencer to be somebody that brings together people and turns them into a community. And that really is the role of the facilitator. And, the facilitators through much of recent history, at least, have been very underappreciated from my perspective. And, another word for a facilitator would be an organizer, right? Bringing people together, organizing whatever the event is. Everybody has the friend or two that are really good at this. They just bring everybody together. They plan all this stuff. They schedule everything. And they're very unsung heroes, right? And so part of the platform really for us is how do we empower these confluencers, facilitators to create these spaces and then have critical mass of people actually coming in? Because to your point, having a persistent space where somebody's going to come in by themselves, that doesn't really build community. That might be interesting for them to go on a journey by themselves through this video game-esque world. And that's fine if that's your purpose. But there are a lot of different mechanisms for creating the kind of critical mass, like closing your world, throwing events, encouraging people, every day at 5 p.m., we have a happy hour in here. And there's going to be some sort of facilitation, right? Those kinds of things, actually planning the synchronous event can be really important.
Yeah. It feels as if it needs two things, structure and permission. So structure being the logistic, the scheduling, the guidance of when is the space open and when is it closed, and having the space in the first place. And then permission is to use it and how to use it. Because as you said, even if people go in at the same time, I have the impression it's maybe a little bit easier to go and speak to someone in the virtual world than in the physical, but it depends what type you are. And still we struggle. So I think, and that's where the facilitation comes in, right? How can you make these encounters less awkward? How can you give permission and a reason for these people to speak? And then I think creating the space around a shared purpose. So who are the people that you are going to meet there? And what do you share also that you have something to break the ice in the first place or to be curious about?
Very interesting. It's interesting that you use the word permission, because we actually have a permissioning system, which the purpose of which is really for you as a community leader to empower other people from your community to also have permission to be facilitators, right? And so you're removing yourself as the blocker from the connection that being made and empowering others. And this is actually a really critical thing within community as well, is, at least in my experience, is not just having one person be the single entity that has all the permission and the power and can bring everybody together. That sounds ridiculous even saying it out loud. And the reason is that, empowering your community to have leadership and ownership of the community and to be facilitators can be a really critical part of building and scaling a community. And of course, all communities have different structures, but I think that also is an important part of bringing people together synchronously, is it not always requiring a single person, not a single point of failure, but having other people have the empowerment and the knowledge, right? Learn from you, to be able to teach them how to do this. And then they have the permission to actually do it. And now you can have multiple connection points and, can be really powerful and scalable.
Super interesting. Okay. I have two thoughts at the same time. That's difficult because I totally agree. And the reason why I agree is because I sense that community is something that creates a sense of belonging. So everyone who is part of a community and an engaged part of the community is searching for this belonging. And I think we enhance it by making it our own. So bringing our full self, our own creativity and being into the space. So by enabling others to bring themselves, then the community will really get stronger. And the parallel thought to that was the very first communities we had were religious communities. And I have the impression that at the moment, especially since Corona, the lockdown, the pandemic, that online communities are almost like the new religion, where we're looking for belonging, shared purpose, shared beliefs and value systems, and even a kind of shared temple, which is then the Topia world. But these first communities were very centralized in terms of power.
Yeah. The first communities were also very centralized in terms of geographic location and proximity. Everybody was very close, very homogenous, right? They were all the same people, mostly. And, I think what we're seeing now is not that, right? We're these international, you could call them religions, religious communities are made up of people from all over the place. It's not, if I create a community right now, it's not going to be, and it's online, it's not going to just be people in LA that are tech entrepreneurs, probably.
What a waste of opportunity.
And so I actually think that, when you have a really homogenous, geographically close in proximity group, the leadership structure can be very top-down hierarchical. I think it's more challenging to do that with an international audience, people with very diverse experiences and perspectives, because there is no one size fits all anymore. And we don't have a perfectly shared language where we've all experienced the same things and we all have the same ancestors. And, when you have diversity, you actually need diversity of thought and diversity of leadership. And so, it has changed, I believe, from the structures that were necessary back in the day. Now, that's not to say that, again, it's not one size fits all. There definitely are international communities that are very top down, particularly when you have a single person like influencers, for example. An influencers community often is driven from the top. But I think, even platforms like Reddit, as an example, you see a subreddit dedicated to an influencer. It's not the influencer that's controlling what's happening in that subreddit. They have mods, right? And even the mod structures, have multiple layers in most cases with different permissions, different powers. There's mobility. There's an opportunity as just like a normal community member to be elevated into a position of being a moderator, being a community leader. And I think that that's actually going to be one of the things that people demand going forward with communities is that upward mobility within the community, because if they're investing their time and their energy in it, they want to be able to, be a facilitator as they gain more knowledge and more experience around the topic.
To shape it. Yeah. How do you go about rules or best practices of how to interact in an online world, in a metaverse? Because if we're bringing in a diverse group of people, as you said, there are no more necessarily shared norms, values, even understanding of how we behave, what's normal, what's not. How did you, or what's your take on creating these shared understandings on how to behave in a space that you cannot, by definition, cannot control because it is a world that is open for everyone to enter?
It's a really good question. We are mostly leaving it up to the communities themselves. We're very much a platform. We provide the tools. So we're giving as many tools as we can for that sort of moderation, facilitation, community building. We have a lot more coming in the future around this as well. But, it's not really, we're not saying here's how a community needs to operate or here's what a structure looks like. Instead, we're creating a lot of flexible systems that allow you to run your community however you think makes sense. And, that can include gating worlds, gating worlds with passwords, with NFT ownership, with passwords, and then, even gating specific events that way, giving out permissions to people. So, like we were just talking about, one of the really powerful things you can do is empower members of your community to themselves be moderators and sort of rangers, and not have it be this top-down decision, but have the community itself sort of co-create and co-organize with you, co-moderate, right? What do we want this community to be? What do we want the best practice rules to be? And what do we do when somebody breaks those rules? And what's the enforcement around that? In Topia and in many of these emerging community platforms, you can create those rules yourself and with your community, and then empower your community to actually enforce them.
Do you have best practices or maybe an example how it totally failed?
One of the challenges can be that if there are not community members with moderation capabilities, in a world and people come in and they're acting against, the agreement for the community, then that can be a really tricky situation. And so we've run into some, consent issues or safety issues. We built a lot of our feature systems to be very consent oriented. You can't just follow somebody. They have to ask you to follow them, as an example. And, we have a lot of features like that. And we're trying to build safer spaces. But again, it's up to people, and people are human and people do weird things. One of the things that we have found is that the whole troll culture that exists, especially in asynchronous platforms, where people are kind of hiding anonymously behind a username and acting, ridiculously, they do that a lot less when they're together synchronously in person and it's another actual human. But, we're running into the same issues that the internet has in general. We empower communities, but it's up to communities to govern themselves in many ways, right? And so, the issues we've had around that are when a community doesn't govern itself at all. They just create a world, they put it in their Facebook group and they say, use this however you want. That can be challenging. And, it's a little bit like creating a space. And to your point around having some sort of hierarchy or some kind of governance, it is important to have that, because otherwise it's like creating a big community space and just saying, hey, everybody can just come in here and do anything they want whenever they want. In the real world, that can lead to problems as well. And so you see the same kind of things in synchronous worlds.
Yeah, I was just thinking of having this huge kind of party space, a hall, or even open the doors to your house. Say, it's a party space. Here's a bunch of chips. Do whatever you want to do to have a good time, and then see what happens, right? Most probably it's going to be destroyed in no time. Or maybe, depending on who's entering, they're going to self-organize and something beautiful will emerge.
Bingo. So it just completely depends on your community is the actual answer.
Yes, and who you invite into the space and how you invite them into the space. So I would be curious from the perspective of someone who built the tool. What have you built into the tool that actually facilitates the experience of a community being in this world together? Because, for instance, what I'm thinking of is, as you mentioned, the following. So in Topia, you really have to walk through the space. So it takes time, which was surprising for me using it the first time, because I was like, no, I want to double click there. I'm already late and now I have to kind of follow the slow avatar. And I would be really curious about your thoughts. Why is this like that? And what else have you consciously built into it?
So our goal has been to enable people to customize the worlds pretty much endlessly. And a lot of what we're building is more customization, more capability. The example you gave of sort of walking from point to point and not being able to just double click, that's sort of the default mode. That's if you're going from one point to another. And it really fosters serendipity, because that the in-between, you said the phrase in-between, the in-between time, I think you're referring to at the beginning of this conversation, but the in-between space within a space, you think about the real world, it's walking from one speaker to the next that you run into people and have serendipity and actually network and meet people and have, these wild encounters, unexpected, unplanned. And so maintaining that parallel from the real world was important for us. We also have teleport capabilities, right? So you can build into any asset in the world, teleporters to any other spot. And so if a world builder wants to create a bunch of teleports right at the spawn location to different events and give people the choice, you can either walk there or you can teleport right there, then that's up to the world builder and up to the community organizers, essentially. And so that's just an example of how we've tried to build the tool set for you to have this base experience and then customize it to have superpowers within your world and really to hone the experience for your visitors to be whatever it is that you can imagine. And, one of the things we like to say is that Topia worlds are really only limited by your imagination. And what we actually, and that's a funny, it's a fun phrase to say, but what we're actually saying there is that we tried to build our tool set to be as flexible as possible so that anything you can imagine, you really can do. And that's where we're going with this platform. And so, when you think about what we're doing versus what others in the space are doing, we all have these sort of synchronous capabilities. We have different features as well, but for Topia, it's about really deep customization of the experience that you're trying to bring people into.
Mm. And I love what you're saying about the serendipity that actually happens on your way to a specific spot. And I'm just thinking, so funny. When I'm arriving at an event and I have the impression, I'm late, I need to be there, I want to teleport myself. Although when I'm walking there, I might meet other people who are also late. And that's an opportunity for a really strong connection because we have at least one thing in common already, right? And a shared experience. And for me, that's innate facilitation built into the tool. So you facilitate that by adding constraints of the slow movement. And then I was lucky enough to be in a session facilitated by Jimbo Clark, who connected us. And he made the walking to the first spot actually a kind of check-in where you would pass by different fireside conversations with invitations to connect and share with someone who is just waiting or sitting or walking by. So I like that.
Absolutely. And you can do that with people sitting there. You can also embed content into different assets on that journey. And so what a lot of people do is actually build sort of walkways that are tutorials or explanations of what you're going to experience. And as you're going, you hit one video after another that pop up that are spatial. So, you getting near this asset, a new video pops up and explains the next part of it. You keep walking, another video pops up, and then everybody that's around you is listening to the same videos at the same time as well. And so, you can actually have that camaraderie with others that are not even just on a walking journey, but on a learning journey with you on your way to wherever you're going.
And the association I immediately have is a kind of art gallery space where you can watch someone's art and then connect with others around that art, or even present your entire business as a walkable space where you don't have websites anymore, but you walk through the content.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that is another way to think about Topia is as an enhancement or a replacement for a traditional website, because you can embed all the same kind of content. You can embed other websites within assets, clickable links, and you can portal between worlds, which are kind of like links between pages. And instead of it being just sort of a static, lonely experience looking at a website, in a Topia world, you can have all that same content, but it's a social experience. It's a journey through the content with other people.
Mm. What do you think are the minimum requirements for someone to facilitate in such a space? So if someone is just starting out, what would you recommend them to do?
It's an interesting question. I think the world sort of empowers some facilitation on their own, like you pointed out, with serendipity, with being able to just break into small groups organically. One of the things with something like a Zoom is you need a facilitator to know how to manage breakout rooms, right? And to put people into breakout rooms. In Topia, you just move your little avatar around by clicking. And whenever you're near people, you're connecting to them, and people can easily just form their own small groups and talk. So you don't need a facilitator to know how to use breakout rooms, quote unquote, because in Topia, there are no breakout rooms. You self-facilitate yourself into those groups. But I would say, one of the important things with spatial environments in general is understanding how to use the spatial nature to your advantage. And, it can be a little bit tricky at first, but as an example, creating different spheres or different areas for people to go into depending on what experience they want to have. So if you want to talk about X, go into this circle. If you want to talk about Y, go into this circle. And maybe they're private zones. So, so they're not overlapping with each other in their spatial connection, or maybe they're just physically separated. And, that's a basic way of facilitating conversation between people. And then you can go on broadcast, you bring everybody back and maybe have people, speak up and say, here's what I learned, the kind of thing that you see where in real life where people, here's the topic we're going to discuss. If you want to talk about this or this, here are the areas you go to, then everybody comes back together. What did you learn? You can easily do that kind of thing. And that's sort of a V1 of facilitation in Topia. Let people self-organize into essentially a breakout room within the same space then bring everybody back together, then give them another couple topics, send them back to news circles. Another one that's pretty easy is just having a line and saying, if you're into snowboarding, go to the left. If you're into skiing, go to the right. And then people sort of self-organize into whichever one they prefer. And then they can have, they can laugh about it. They can talk amongst themselves about it. So that's always a really, and then come back together. Here's another one. That's a really fun little facilitator activity as well. And there's a lot of examples like that are unique to spatial environments in a way that would never actually make sense in something like Zoom, for example.
True.
But think about the kinds of things you do in real life. You can do a lot of those in a spatial environment.
And then it's interesting how it constrains then in a different way. So for instance, I love facilitating structured workshops on Zoom just because it makes it so efficient. I click on a button and people are in a breakout room and they're random and it's the Zoom gods that decide. And when I want them to be back, they're all back. I mean, it sounds very dictatorial, but it's very efficient. Whereas in the real world, nobody comes back. You don't do 5-minute breakouts unless you say, turn to your neighbor and share something, because it will take them 5 minutes to come back because they're going to grab a coffee and go to the toilet. And then they meet someone else and have a little conversation, right? So everything takes longer. And I get this similar sense from the Topia world, where it's more for the unhurried conversations that have a very clear purpose and structure beforehand, because you have to build the space, and then leaves a lot of space in between for things to emerge. Whereas on Zoom, for instance, I can be much more nimble, for instance, about the exercise that I'm doing, because I can change them on the spot and I don't have to build a world around it. But then there's less opportunity for emergence.
I think the reality is that there are different platforms and different tools for different activities, and that's great. And you can embed Zoom experiences. What a lot of people do is they use Topia as sort of the lobby, as the community space. And then for a highly structured experience or facilitation where Zoom is actually a better tool, you can embed Zoom within a Topia world, and they can just be hanging out there and, okay, now everybody go into the Zoom facilitation and everybody will go there. And then once you're done with that, you come back to the Topia world, and you can even then do another Zoom breakout. You could have, a bunch of different Zooms embedded throughout the world and allow people to then enter into structured Zoom environments from the Topia world. And you can use other tools that way as well. So, and we're very encouraging, we don't have sharp elbows. We love the idea of Topia being sort of the lobby, the meeting place, the community space, and then entering into very specifically crafted experiences. And there's going to be a lot more of these as we go forward into the future as well, not just Zoom, but other tools to help structure different types of experiences. And that's great.
Absolutely. And I love you pointing out the lobby character. The first year I started Never Done Before as a festival, it was in 2020. And maybe Topia was just started. And I was dreaming of exactly that lobby. So for me, the big challenge of having an online conference or festival was, okay, you have this amazing experience in a workshop, and then suddenly you're back in your living room all by yourself, and all the magic is gone, and it feels even more lonely, right, than before, because now you're conscious. So we had one Zoom channel, which was the lobby. It turned out to be a huge mess, but actually a kind of happy mess, because people were dropping in and out. And then we created some breakout rooms for them to have private conversations. But yeah, now I'm very happy that there are tools that actually do that job and facilitate the, I almost said lobbying.
It's right. And, that's actually part of the origin of Topia as it is right now. There was a group called Immersiverse at the beginning of the pandemic. First of all, Topia was originally a VR platform, and my plan was to build it over the 2020s and have it be a platform for creators to co-create experiences together. And when the pandemic hit, I basically threw all of that out and restarted as a browser-based to make it way more accessible, realizing like people actually need this right now. And one of the examples of that was this experience called Immersiverse, which was thrown by some friends of mine. And it was a series of Zoom experiences, let's say 8 different Zoom experiences that were heavily facilitated. But in between those Zoom experiences, there was nowhere to go. There was nothing to do. And there was a lobby like what you're talking about of 50 to 100 people at once. And it was a disaster. It's one person at a time is talking. There's no serendipity. There's no, meeting people randomly and having side conversations in small groups. And we realized that there was an opportunity to create that was really needed for these kinds of experiences. And so for the next Immersiverse, so I built this in basically 3 weeks of version 1 of it. And we became the lobby of the next Immersiverse. And that was our first event, essentially. And it was amazing. And they embedded all of those 8 different Zoom experiences in the Topia world itself. So you walk from Zoom experience to a Zoom experience and you have serendipity and you're hanging out with people and you're having little small group conversations. You're just hanging out in the lobby for a while because you kind of need a break from the Zoom intense facilitated experience. And so a lot of people used it then that way, and a lot of people are using it that way now. And I think that's a fantastic use case of Topia.
Very inspiring. Which brings me to the 2 more questions. That's what we're here for, right? Hello, listener. Are you tired of listening to my podcast voice praising our sponsor Session Lab in each episode? I think it's time to pass the mic over to you. So if you are as much of a Session Lab fan and user as I am, please share your experience and praise, and don't be shy of add a sentence of self-promo. Send me your soundbite and you might hear yourself on the next show and find your name and URL in the show notes. I'm looking forward to hearing from you.